The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday, innocuous white envelope with my name printed in formal type. I recognized the return address immediately, Daniel's lawyer. My fingers trembled slightly as I sliced it open with practiced precision, the same way I'd opened hundreds of business correspondences over the years. Inside, a single page detailed my soon-to-be ex-husband's generous settlement offer. I had to laugh. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, scanning the insulting terms. Half of our checking account, none of our investments, and 60 days to vacate our home of 12 years. The home I'd paid for, renovated and maintained while Daniel built his supposedly illustrious career as a financial advisor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My phone buzzed with a text. Daniel, of course. Got the offer? My lawyer thinks it's more than fair considering your situation. My situation. That's what he'd taken to calling my career choices since he'd filed for divorce 3 months ago, as if working remotely as a property investment consultant was somehow less legitimate than his corner office and monogrammed business cards, as if the flexibility I'd maintained while supporting his endless networking dinners and client golf outings was a character flaw rather than a calculated decision. I placed the letter on my antique mahogany desk, the one Daniel had repeatedly suggested we replace with something more modern, and gazed out at the Seattle skyline from our hillside home. Rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating rivulets that distorted the Space Needle in the distance. 12 years of marriage dissolving in a 4-paragraph letter and a condescending text. "How generous of you, Daniel," I whispered to the empty home office, offering me half of what's already legally mine. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I pulled up a different contact on my phone and pressed call. "Victoria Howard," answered the crisp, professional voice I'd been hoping for. "Victoria, it's Claire Bennett. I've received Daniel's settlement offer. It's time to proceed with Plan B." The silence on the other end lasted only a moment before Victoria's calculated response. "I expected as much. I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. Sure you don't want a counter first?" "No," I replied, watching a seagull battle the wind outside my window. "Daniel believes I'm going to crumble. Let's let him keep believing that. For now." After ending the call, I pulled open my laptop and entered my password, bypassing my regular work email to access a secondary account. One Daniel knew nothing about. One linked to a separate LLC I'd established 5 years into our marriage when Daniel's first affair had made me realize I needed protection he couldn't touch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 15 unread emails awaited me, most from property managers across Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver. While Daniel had been telling his colleagues, friends, and eventually his mistress Laura that I was just playing at having a career, I'd been quietly building a real estate portfolio that now included 22 residential properties and 3 commercial buildings. Daniel believed I worked for West Coast Property Consulting. He didn't know I owned it, along with 4 other investment companies operating under different names. He thought our home was the extent of our real estate holdings. He had no idea that half the buildings his financial firm recommended as investment opportunities were already part of my portfolio. My phone buzzed again. "Daniel, did you get my text? The offer expires in 48 hours. Don't make this difficult." "Claire," I allowed myself a small smile as I typed my response. "I'll need time to process. This is all so overwhelming. Can I have until next week to respond?" His reply was immediate, dripping with the condescension that had become his default tone in recent months. "I suppose. Try to be reasonable about this. You know I've always handled our finances. This really is more than fair given your limited contributions." Limited contributions. I closed my eyes, remembering the night 6 years ago when Daniel had lost a major client and come home raging drunk. I'd calmed him, helped him strategize, and then stayed up until 3 a.m., creating a presentation that had not only won back the client but had brought in 3 more. Daniel had taken full credit, of course. My limited contributions had saved his career more than once, not that he'd ever acknowledged it. Just as he'd never acknowledged that the investment hobby he so often mocked had paid for the extensive kitchen renovation he loved to show off when hosting his colleagues. I pulled up the document my attorney had prepared weeks ago when Daniel had first announced he wanted a divorce. It outlined every property I owned, every account in my name, and every investment I'd made over the past decade. Assets that, thanks to careful planning and separate LLC structures, were mine alone. "Time to see exactly what you're walking away from, Daniel," I murmured, attaching the file to an email addressed to Victoria. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows with growing insistence. Appropriate weather for the storm I was about to unleash. But first, I needed to maintain the facade a bit longer. I grabbed my jacket and car keys. Daniel would be having lunch with Laura at Maison Marcel, their regular Tuesday spot. I'd known about their affair for months before he'd finally admitted it, just as I'd known about the others before her. Daniel wasn't nearly as discreet as he thought. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, spotting Daniel's Tesla immediately. I parked several spaces away and waited, watching the entrance. At precisely 1:30 they emerged. Daniel in his tailored navy suit, hand resting possessively on Laura's lower back. She laughed at something he said, tossing her expertly highlighted hair over one shoulder. I snapped several photos with my phone, then started my car as they approached Daniel's Tesla. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Daniel looked up just as I drove past, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm to forced nonchalance in the span of seconds. My phone rang almost immediately. "Are you following me now?" he demanded when I answered. "No, Daniel. I had lunch with Maggie," I lied smoothly, naming a friend whose office was nearby. "What a coincidence running into you. I told you I had a client lunch," he snapped. "Did you? I must have forgotten. Silly me. Anyway, don't worry about dinner tonight. I'm meeting with an employment counselor to discuss my options, since I'll need to find something more substantial soon." The pause on his end told me everything. He was calculating, wondering if I was finally accepting my impending financial doom. "That's good, Claire. A positive step. I'm glad you're being practical about this." "Well, you've made it clear where I stand," I replied, infusing my voice with just the right amount of resignation. "I need to start planning for my future." After ending the call, I drove not to an employment counselor, but to the offices of Howard, Jenkins, and Associates. Victoria was waiting for me, her sleek silver hair framing a face that had intimidated opposing counsel for over 30 years. "He took the bait?" she asked as we settled in her corner office overlooking Elliott Bay. "Completely. He thinks I'm starting to accept my limited options. He has no idea what's coming." Victoria smiled, sliding a folder across her desk. "Then let's make sure it hits him like a freight train." Inside the folder were the documents we'd been preparing for weeks, comprehensive financial disclosures that would be required once we formally rejected Daniel's insulting offer. Unlike the severely understated financial statements Daniel had submitted to the court, mine would reveal the full extent of my assets. "Are you sure about not taking half of his retirement accounts?" Victoria asked, her pen poised over the paperwork. "You're entitled to them." I shook my head. "I don't need them. What I need is for him to understand exactly who he's been married to for the past 12 years. What I need is the house, which is already in your LLC's name, though he doesn't know that yet." "Exactly." I smiled, remembering how I'd suggested putting the house in an LLC for tax purposes years ago. Daniel had signed the paperwork without reading it, too busy preparing for a golf outing with clients. I want him to learn that I own the house outright when he tries to force me out of it. Victoria made a note in her elegant handwriting. And the other properties? Keep them quiet for now. Let's focus on the house and the business. That will be shock enough. We spent the next 2 hours finalizing our strategy. By the time I left Victoria's office, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting long afternoon shadows across the city. Symbolic, I thought, of the light about to shine on Daniel's deception. Back at home, I found a message from Daniel saying he'd be working late. Translation: spending the evening with Laura. Perfect. I needed the space to prepare. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, soon to be just mine, and opened the walk-in closet we shared. Daniel's side was a study in expensive uniformity. Tailored. Suits in navy and charcoal, crisp white shirts, silk ties arranged by color. The wardrobe of a man who wanted to project success and stability. Methodically, I began removing his things, placing each item carefully in the suitcases I'd purchased earlier that week. Not throwing or damaging anything. I wasn't vindictive, just strategic. By midnight, I'd packed most of his clothes and personal items, leaving just enough in place that he wouldn't notice immediately. The rest I stored in the guest room closet, ready for his eventual departure. My phone buzzed with a text as I was finishing. Meeting ran late. Staying downtown tonight. See you tomorrow. Downtown meaning Laura's condo, of course. Another night in what he thought was our marital bed, but was actually my property, legally speaking. The irony wasn't lost on me. No problem. I texted back. Hope the meeting went well. I slept soundly that night, better than I had in months. The certainty of my plan provided a comfort that had been missing since Daniel had sat me down 3 months ago and explained with practiced sympathy that he'd outgrown our marriage. Morning brought another gray Seattle day, but my mood remained. Sunny as I prepared for my regular Wednesday client calls. Between meetings, I finalized the documents Victoria had prepared, signing each with a flourish before scanning and emailing them back to her. At 2:17 p.m., my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I just got an email from your lawyer rejecting my settlement offer, he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled anger. What exactly do you think you're doing? Protecting my interests, I replied calmly, continuing to type an email as we spoke. Your offer wasn't reasonable, Daniel. Not reasonable? I'm giving you half of our liquid assets. What more do you want? I want what's fair. I want what's mine. He scoffed, the sound so dismissive it made my fingers pause over my keyboard. And what exactly do you think is yours? You've barely worked throughout our marriage. I'm the one who's built everything we have. The statement was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost broke character and laughed. Instead, I kept my voice even. I guess we'll have to let the court decide that. Claire? His voice took on the patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. Be smart about this. My lawyer says you'll be lucky to get what I've offered. Don't make this ugly. It became ugly the moment you decided our vows were optional, Daniel. I'll see you at home tonight. I hung up before he could respond, knowing the abrupt ending would irritate him more than anything I could have said. Daniel hated not having the last word. Sure enough, he called back immediately. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as he lectured me about being emotional and unreasonable. Classic Daniel, when logic failed him, he resorted to questioning my emotional stability. Victoria called shortly after. Daniel's lawyer just reached out. They want to meet tomorrow to discuss options. They've seen the financials? Not yet. That's our ace. Right now, they just think you're being difficult. When do you want to reveal that you own the house? I considered the question. Let's wait until they push for it specifically. I want to see Daniel's face when he learns the truth. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of work calls and emails. I was finalizing a property acquisition in Portland when I heard Daniel's key in the lock. Earlier than expected, he must have been truly rattled. Claire? He called out, his voice echoing through the open floor plan of our home. "In my office," I replied, deliberately using the possessive pronoun. It had always been my office, even though Daniel had insisted for years on calling it the spare room. His footsteps were sharp against the hardwood as he approached, each step telegraphing his irritation. He appeared in my doorway, still in his work suit, his expression a carefully controlled mask of disapproval. "We need to talk about this response from your lawyer," he said, waving a printed email. "This is completely unreasonable." I saved my work and closed my laptop, giving him my full attention. "What specifically do you find unreasonable, Daniel?" "All of it. You're asking for the house, Claire. The house!" He emphasized the words as if I might not understand their meaning. "Do you have any idea what this property is worth?" I did, of course. To the dollar. I'd just had it appraised last month. "I'm aware of its value," I replied calmly. "I'm also aware that I've contributed significantly to that value through the renovations I've overseen." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Picking out paint colors isn't exactly a financial contribution, Claire." And there it was, the fundamental misunderstanding that had defined our marriage for years. Daniel had never seen, never wanted to see, exactly what I brought to the table. "We can discuss the details tomorrow with the lawyers," I said, rising from my desk. "I've made dinner reservations at Altura for 7:30. I thought we could at least be civilized about this." The suggestion caught him off guard. He'd clearly come home prepared for a fight. The mention of Altura, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, seemed to reassure him that I wasn't completely lost to reason. "Fine," he conceded. "But this discussion isn't over." "I didn't think it was," I replied with a small smile. 7:30, Daniel. Don't be late." After he left to change, I sent a quick text to Victoria. "Dinner at Altura tonight, setting the stage." Her reply was immediate. "Perfect. Be careful not to reveal too much." I had no intention of revealing anything yet. Tonight was about letting Daniel believe he still had the upper hand, that I was trying to salvage some dignity through small showings of independence. Let him think the dinner was my attempt at maintaining our social standing. Let him underestimate me one last time. I chose my outfit carefully, a black Prada dress that Daniel had always approved of, paired with the diamond earrings he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. The perfect costume for the role I needed to play, the soon-to-be ex-wife trying to maintain appearances while privately falling apart. Daniel drove us to the restaurant in his Tesla, filling the silence with comments about mutual friends and market fluctuations, safe topics that avoided our impending legal battle. I responded appropriately, asking about his workday, maintaining the fiction that we were still partners in any meaningful sense. The maitre d' greeted us by name, leading us to a corner table with views of the chef's exhibition kitchen. Daniel ordered an expensive bottle of wine without consulting me, then spent several minutes discussing vintage and terroir with the sommelier. Typical power moves meant to remind me of his superior knowledge and taste. "You look nice tonight," he offered as our first course arrived. "That dress has always suited you." "Thank you," I replied, taking a small sip of the wine he'd selected. "You seem tired. Work stress?" A shadow crossed his face. "Nothing I can't handle, just some client issues. And this divorce situation isn't helping." "I imagine Laura provides comfort," I said mildly, watching his expression shift from surprise to wariness. "Let's not do this here, Claire." "Do what? Acknowledge reality?" "I'm not making a scene, Daniel. I'm simply stating facts." He studied me for a moment, trying to gauge if I was about to cause the kind of public embarrassment he dreaded above all else. Satisfied that I wasn't, he relaxed slightly. "Fine. Yes, Laura and I are seeing each other. That's hardly a secret at this point. How long? Does it matter?" "To me, yes," he sighed, swirling his wine glass. "About a year. But the marriage was over long before that, Claire. We both know that. A year. Longer than I'd suspected, though not by much." I nodded, absorbing the information without revealing that it affected me in any way. And you think she's different from Stephanie? Or Rebecca? Or Megan? I asked, naming his previous affairs in chronological order. Daniel's knuckles whitened around his wineglass. You knew about all of them? Of course I did. I just chose not to confront you. Why? The question seemed genuine, his brow furrowed in confusion. I shrugged slightly. I had my reasons. The conversation paused as our main courses arrived. We ate in silence for several minutes, the exquisite food almost wasted on the tension between us. Is that why you're fighting me on the settlement? Daniel finally asked. Revenge for the affairs? No, I replied truthfully. This isn't about revenge, Daniel. It's about getting what I deserve after 12 years of marriage. And you think you deserve the house? His tone had returned to condescending. Among other things, yes. He shook his head, cutting into his Wagyu beef with unnecessary force. Your lawyer is giving you bad advice, Claire. You won't win this. We'll see. The remainder of dinner passed in strained conversation about mutual acquaintances and memories safe enough to revisit. Daniel insisted on picking up the check, another power move designed to remind me who controlled the finances, and I let him, knowing it would be one of the last times he could perform such a gesture. The drive home was silent, both of us retreating, to our own thoughts. As we pulled into the driveway, the security lights illuminated our modernist home, all clean lines and expansive glass, perched on its hillside lot overlooking the city. It really is a beautiful house, Daniel said quietly as he turned off the engine. I'm going to miss it. The statement, so presumptuous, so completely backward, almost made me break my carefully maintained composure. Instead, I simply replied, yes, it is beautiful. Inside, Daniel headed straight for his study, no doubt to call Laura and complain about my unreasonable demands. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, removing my earrings and dress with mechanical precision. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end for Daniel's illusions. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully, secure in the knowledge that I held all the cards. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the look that would cross Daniel's face when he learned that not only did I own our house outright, but that his options were far more limited than he'd assumed. I thought about the years of dismissal, of condescension, of being treated as decorative rather than essential. Most of all, I thought about the supreme irony that after tomorrow, if Daniel wanted to continue living in the home he'd so casually assumed was his to divide, he would need to negotiate with me not as an ex-wife, but as a landlord, and I intended to be a very demanding one. I woke before my alarm the next morning, the gray light of dawn barely filtering through the bedroom curtains. Daniel was still asleep, his back to me, maintaining the careful distance that had defined our sleeping arrangements for months. I slipped out of bed and into my running clothes, needing to clear my head before the day's confrontation. The morning air was crisp with early spring coolness as I followed my usual 5-mile route along the lake. With each step, I mentally rehearsed the meeting ahead, anticipating Daniel's reactions, planning my responses. By the time I returned home, showered, and dressed in my carefully selected outfit, a charcoal Armani suit that projected quiet confidence, I felt centered and prepared. Daniel was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone while absently stirring his protein shake. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes narrowing slightly at my attire. "That's quite the power suit," he remarked, a hint of mockery in his tone. "Trying to intimidate my lawyer?" I poured myself a cup of coffee, adding a precise amount of almond milk. "I'm dressing appropriately for a business meeting, Daniel. Nothing more." "This isn't a business meeting, Claire. It's a divorce settlement discussion." I sipped my coffee, allowing the slight curve of a smile. "In my experience, those are often the most important business meetings of all." His phone buzzed and he glanced down, frowning slightly at whatever he saw. I need to head in early. Some client issues to handle before our meeting. I'll see you at Victoria's office at 11. Victoria's office? I raised an eyebrow. The meeting is at Howard Jenkins and Associates. Your lawyer agreed to that yesterday. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Fine, 11 o'clock. After he left, I called Victoria to confirm our final preparations. The financial disclosures are ready, she assured me, and I've prepared the documentation regarding the house ownership. Are you sure you want to reveal everything today? Not everything, I clarified, checking my appearance in the hallway mirror. Just enough to shift the power dynamic. The rest can wait for the right moment. I arrived at Victoria's office 30 minutes early, using the time to review our strategy. Once more, at precisely 11, the receptionist announced Daniel's arrival with his attorney, Gregory Walsh, a divorce lawyer known for aggressive tactics and billing practices to match. Victoria's conference room projected exactly the image we wanted. Established success without ostentatious display. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Elliott Bay, while the polished walnut table between us served as the battlefield for the coming negotiation. Daniel entered first, his confidence evident, in his stride and the dismissive glance he gave me before taking his seat. Gregory followed, a thick portfolio tucked under one arm, his expression professionally neutral, but with the underlying smugness of someone who believed victory was inevitable. Thank you all for meeting today, Victoria began, her silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting. I believe we have some substantive issues to discuss regarding the Bennett divorce settlement. Gregory leaned forward, placing his portfolio on the table with a decisive thump. Indeed we do. My client has made a more than generous initial offer which your client has inexplicably rejected. We're hoping today's discussion can bring Mrs. Bennett to a more realistic understanding of her position. The condescension in his voice matched Daniel's usual tone so perfectly that I wondered if they'd rehearsed this approach together. Before we discuss specific terms, Victoria replied smoothly, we need to address some discrepancies in the financial disclosures Mr. Bennett has provided. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, the first sign of discomfort. What discrepancies? I've been completely transparent. Victoria slid a folder across the table. These are the complete financial disclosures from Mrs. Bennett, along with documentation of certain assets that appear to have been omitted from your filings. Gregory barely glanced at the folder. If this is some attempt to claim a portion of my client's business interests. Actually, I interrupted, speaking for the first time, it's to ensure that everyone has an accurate understanding of our marital assets, and which party actually controls them. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he pulled the folder toward him, flipping it open with controlled movements. I watched his face carefully as he scanned the first page, then the second, his expression shifting from dismissive to confused to alarmed. What is this? He demanded, looking up sharply. West Coast Property Consulting is listed as your sole property with annual revenues of... He broke off, staring at the figure again as if it might change. This can't be right. I assure you, it is, Victoria replied. Mrs. Bennett is not merely an employee of West Coast Property Consulting as you seem to have believed. She is the founder and sole owner. Daniel turned to me, genuine bewilderment replacing his usual condescension. You're telling me you own the company? That's impossible. It's a legitimate firm with major clients across 3 states. Yes, Daniel, I replied calmly. That's exactly what I'm telling you. I founded it 8 years ago. The consulting work you've so often dismissed as my little hobby generates 7 figures annually. Gregory was now reviewing the documents with growing concern, his earlier smugness evaporating. These financial statements appear thorough, but we'll need time to verify them. Of course, Victoria agreed, though I assure you they've been meticulously prepared and can be readily verified. Daniel was still staring at me, trying to reconcile this new information with his long-held beliefs about my capabilities. Why wouldn't you tell me? All these years, would you have believed me? I asked simply. Or would you have taken credit for my success the way you did with the Thompson presentation? The Carter portfolio? The Westlake development strategy? His flinch confirmed my suspicions. He remembered each instance perfectly. That's ancient history, he dismissed, regaining some of his composure. And irrelevant to our current negotiations. Even if your company is more substantial than I realized, it doesn't change the fact that our marital assets need to be divided equitably. Victoria smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. Let's discuss those marital assets then, shall we? Particularly the house. Gregory straightened, clearly relieved to be back on familiar ground. As outlined in our proposal, Mr. Bennett is willing to allow Mrs. Bennett 60 days of residence before the property is sold and the proceeds divided. That won't be necessary, I replied. Daniel smirked, assuming I was conceding this point. So, you'll move out sooner? That's surprisingly reasonable of you, Claire. No, Daniel. I mean, it won't be necessary to sell the house or divide any proceeds from such a sale. I nodded to Victoria, who produced another document. This is the deed to the property at 1857 Highland Drive, she explained, sliding it across the table. As you can see, it's owned by Lakeside Holdings LLC. Daniel waved a dismissive hand. I'm aware of the LLC structure. We set it up for tax purposes years ago. Actually, I corrected gently, I set it up. You merely signed the paperwork without reading it. If you had read it, you would have noticed that Lakeside Holdings is a subsidiary of West Coast Property Management, my company. The house has been solely my property for the past 7 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel stared at the document, then at me, then back at the document. Gregory began frantically flipping through his portfolio, presumably searching for something to contradict this revelation. That's not possible, Daniel finally managed, his voice unnaturally tight. I would have known. How? I asked. You've never shown any interest in the property management aspects of our life. You thought my handling of contractors and renovations was just a housewife's hobby. You signed whatever I put in front of you, too busy with your real job to bother with details. Gregory leaned over to whisper something in Daniel's ear, but Daniel shook his head sharply. There must be some mistake, he insisted. We bought that house together. I remember the closing. We attended the closing together, I corrected. The purchase was made through Lakeside Holdings, using funds from my investment portfolio. Your name appears nowhere on any of the ownership documents. Daniel's face had gone pale, the implications finally sinking in. You're saying I have no claim to our home. Your home, I clarified. And no, legally speaking, you don't. Gregory had recovered enough to attempt damage control. This is highly irregular. Even if the property is technically in Mrs. Bennett's name, it was clearly treated as a marital asset throughout the marriage. Mr. Bennett has contributed substantially to its maintenance and improvement. Victoria raised an elegant eyebrow. Has he? Our records show that all property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs have been paid directly from Lakeside Holdings accounts. Mr. Bennett's contributions appear, limited to occasionally selecting furniture and complaining about renovation timelines. Daniel's expression had transformed from shock to anger. This is absurd. I've lived in that house for 12 years. I've hosted clients there. I've built my professional reputation with that address, that neighborhood. Yes, I agreed. You've enjoyed all the benefits of living in my property, but enjoyment doesn't constitute ownership, Daniel. Gregory was now in full crisis management mode. We'll need to adjourn this meeting to review these documents properly. This changes the parameters of our negotiations considerably. Of course, Victoria agreed smoothly. However, there is one more matter to address before we conclude today. She produced a final document, this one bearing the letterhead of my attorney's firm. Given that we've established the house is solely Mrs. Bennett's property, and Mr. Bennett has no legal claim to it, This is a formal notice that his tenancy will end in 30 days. Mrs. Bennet is willing to negotiate a short-term lease agreement if Mr. Bennet wishes to remain in the property longer, but the terms would need to be mutually beneficial. Daniel snatched the paper, reading it with growing disbelief. You're evicting me from my own home? My home, I corrected again. And technically, it's not an eviction. It's a formal notification that your rent-free living arrangement is coming to an end. If you wish to continue residing there, we can discuss rental terms. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by Gregory clearing his throat uncomfortably. This is clearly an attempt to gain leverage in the divorce proceedings, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. The court won't look favorably on such tactics. Victoria's smile was serene. It's simply a property owner exercising her rights. Mr. Walsh, nothing more, nothing less. Mrs. Bennet has been extraordinarily patient, allowing Mr. Bennet to reside in her property rent-free despite his extramarital activities and his decision to end the marriage. Daniel was still staring at the eviction notice, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. You planned this, he said, looking up at me with newfound wariness. All of it. I planned to protect myself, I corrected. Something you made, necessary years ago. The meeting concluded shortly after, with Gregory practically dragging Daniel out of the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see them in heated conversation by the elevators, Daniel gesturing angrily while his lawyer attempted to calm him. Well, Victoria said once they'd departed, that went exactly as expected. Phase 1 complete. I agreed, gathering my documents. How long before they regroup and counter? Given what we've just revealed, I'd say Daniel will be on the phone with every high-priced divorce attorney in Seattle by dinner. They'll want to challenge the house ownership, of course. Let them try, I replied, feeling the first genuine smile in months spread across my face. Every document is in order. And when they realize that? Victoria asked, though her expression told me she already knew the answer. Then the real negotiations begin. I left Victoria's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of deception, both Daniel's and my own, had been partially lifted. There were still battles ahead, but the war's momentum had shifted, decisively in my favor. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel as I reached my car. We need to talk, tonight, alone. I considered ignoring it, but decided a face-to-face conversation might be illuminating. 7 p.m., the house, I replied deliberately, avoiding calling it home or our house. The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of work calls and emails. I finalized the purchase of a small apartment building in Portland, approved renovations for a commercial property in Vancouver, and conducted 2 virtual meetings with investors. The ordinary rhythm of my actual professional life, the one Daniel had never bothered to understand, provided a comforting counterpoint to the morning's confrontation. At precisely 7 p.m., I heard Daniel's key in the lock. I was seated in the living room, a glass of Cabernet in hand, positioned so that the city lights served as my backdrop. Image mattered to Daniel. I wanted him to see me framed by the success he'd never appreciated. He entered looking disheveled, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of stress. His tie was loosened, hair slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Would you like a drink? I offered, gesturing to the open bottle on the side table. What I'd like, he replied tightly, is an explanation. How long have you been planning this? I took a measured sip of my wine. If by this you mean protecting my assets from a husband I couldn't trust? Since your first affair, Daniel, about 7 years, he paced the room, unable to settle. So this entire time, all these years, you've been what? Plotting against me? No, I corrected. I've been building a life that couldn't be destroyed when you inevitably decided I was disposable. There's a difference. He stopped pacing, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. I never thought you were disposable, didn't you? What would you call it when you told me I had limited contributions to our marriage? When you dismissed my work as a hobby? When you assumed I would crumble without your financial support? He had the decency to look away. I never meant— Yes, you did, I interrupted. You meant exactly that. You just never imagined I might have created options for myself. Daniel moved to the bar cart and poured himself a generous measure of scotch, downing half of it in one swallow. So what now? He asked finally. You evict me from the house out of spite? Not spite, I corrected. Business. The house is an asset I own. You want to continue living in it. That makes you a potential tenant, nothing more. He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. You expect me to pay rent to my own wife? Soon-to-be ex-wife, I reminded him. And yes, if you wish to continue living here, you'll need to pay market-rate rent. This is ridiculous, he muttered, finishing his scotch. My lawyer says we can challenge the property transfer as a fraudulent attempt to shield marital assets. Your lawyer is welcome to try, I replied calmly. But the LLC was established long before any divorce was contemplated. The purchase was made with funds I can trace directly to my separate business activities, and all maintenance has been paid from accounts you've never contributed to. But please, waste your money on legal fees if you'd like. Daniel refilled his glass, his movements jerky with suppressed anger. What do you want, Claire? Really? Is this all about punishing me for Laura? This isn't about Laura, or Stephanie, or any of the others, I said, setting my wine glass down carefully. It's about consequences, Daniel. For years you've lived as if your actions had none. You cheated repeatedly, believing I was too dependent to leave. You filed for divorce, believing I would be financially devastated. You offered me an insulting settlement, believing I had no alternatives. I stood smoothing my skirt. Now you're discovering that your beliefs were incorrect. I don't need your money, I don't need your protection, and I certainly don't need to subsidize your housing while you build a new life with Laura. So that's it, he demanded, gesturing expansively. 12 years of marriage and you're just— what? Becoming my landlord? If you choose to stay, yes. The rental agreement will be on your email by morning. Market rate for this neighborhood is quite steep, as I'm sure you're aware. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, disbelief warring, with dawning respect in his expression. I never knew you could be this calculated. You never knew me at all, Daniel. That was always our fundamental problem. He drained his second scotch, setting the glass down with exaggerated care. And if I refuse to sign this rental agreement, if I contest the divorce settlement, then things will become considerably more complicated for you, I replied evenly. Victoria has prepared documentation of every affair, every financial indiscretion, every client you've poached unethically. We're prepared to make all of it public, if necessary. His face paled. You wouldn't. I would prefer not to, I conceded. It would be messy for both of us, but make no mistake, I will if you force my hand. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of revelations and recalibrations. Daniel was seeing me clearly perhaps for the first time, and the recognition of his miscalculation was written plainly across his face. I'll review the rental agreement, he finally said, his voice subdued, and discuss the revised settlement terms with my lawyer. A wise decision. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with a question that seemed to surprise even him. Were you ever going to tell me about the company, the properties, any of it? I considered the question carefully before answering. If you had ever shown genuine interest in my work, not as something cute your wife did to stay busy, but as a legitimate professional endeavor, yes, I might have. But you never asked the right questions, Daniel. You never wanted to see me as your equal. He nodded once, absorbing this truth, then left without another word. I returned to my wine, gazing out at the city lights. The confrontation had gone more smoothly than I'd anticipated. Daniel had always respected power, even when he didn't like its application. Now that he understood I held significant leverage, he would calculate his next moves more carefully. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "How did it go?" "Phase 2 complete," I replied. "He'll sign the rental agreement." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, of course. Daniel might regroup, might find some angle to challenge my position. But for tonight, I savored the small victory of finally being seen, truly seen by the man who had spent years looking through me, from wife to landlord. It wasn't the transition I'd once imagined for myself, but as I sat in my house, watching Seattle's lights shimmer against the night sky, I couldn't help thinking it was far more satisfying than I'd expected. Morning light filtered through the blinds as I reviewed the rental agreement Victoria had prepared. The terms were strict but fair. Monthly rent at the upper end of market value, a substantial security deposit, and explicit restrictions on modifications to the property. Most importantly, the agreement included a clause requiring Daniel to vacate within 48 hours if he brought any overnight guests to the property, a provision aimed specifically at Laura. My phone rang just as I was adding a final note about maintenance responsibilities. "He's been calling all morning," Victoria said without preamble. "Apparently he's consulted with 3 different attorneys since yesterday, all of whom have confirmed what we told him about the house." "And?" I asked, pouring myself a second cup of coffee, "and they've advised him to negotiate rather than fight. His lawyer wants to schedule another meeting for tomorrow." I smiled to myself. "Perfect. Let's make it lunch. Canless." "Canless? That's rather public." Victoria's tone carried a hint of surprise. "Exactly. Daniel hates scenes. He'll be on his best behavior, especially once word gets around that we're there together." After ending the call, I emailed the rental agreement to Daniel with a brief note. "For your review, terms are non-negotiable. Direct and businesslike, the tone I'd adopt for all our interactions going forward." His response came almost immediately. "We need to discuss this in person. I'll be home by 6. Home. Still using that word as if the property remained ours rather than mine. His inability to adapt to our new reality would make the coming weeks interesting, to say the least. I spent the day immersed in work, deliberately focusing on a complex acquisition in Vancouver that required my full attention. The familiar rhythm of spreadsheets, market analyses, and contractor negotiations provided a welcome distraction from the personal drama unfolding in my life. At 5:45, I changed into a casual but elegant outfit, designer jeans, a silk blouse, and subtle gold jewelry. The kind of effortless sophistication Daniel had always approved of. My appearance was a weapon in these negotiations, and I wielded it deliberately. Daniel arrived precisely at 6, entering the house with the cautious air of someone no longer certain of his welcome. He'd changed from his work suit into more casual attire, though I noted he'd chosen one of his more expensive sweaters, a cashmere blend in navy that I'd given him 2 Christmases ago. "I brought dinner," he announced, holding up a bag from Altura, our recent dinner spot. A peace offering, perhaps, or simply a calculated move to create a more relaxed atmosphere for the conversation to come. "That wasn't necessary," I replied, though I made no move to reject the offering. He set the bag on the kitchen island, removing containers with practiced efficiency. I thought we could talk more productively over a good meal. I had them pack your favorite, the scallops with saffron sauce. The familiarity of the gesture struck me as oddly intimate given our circumstances. For a moment, I glimpsed the Daniel I'd fallen in love with years ago, attentive, thoughtful, aware of my preferences, the man who'd been slowly erased by success and entitlement. "I've reviewed the rental agreement," he continued, carefully plating the food as if this were just another dinner at home. "Some of the terms are difficult." "They're market appropriate," I replied, accepting the plate he offered. "In fact, Considering the property value, you could argue they're quite reasonable. He gestured toward the dining table, and I allowed him this small direction of our interaction. We sat across from each other, the city lights beginning to glimmer beyond the windows as dusk settled. The overnight guest restriction is hardly standard, he noted, taking a careful bite of his steak. Neither are our circumstances, I countered. I have no interest in subsidizing your affair, Daniel. If you want to entertain Laura, you can do so elsewhere. He set down his fork, studying me with newfound wariness. This feels punitive. It's business, I corrected. You wanted a divorce. You initiated this separation. I'm simply ensuring that my property is used according to my preferences. Your property, he repeated, the words still clearly uncomfortable on his tongue. I've been thinking about that all day. How did I never notice? The paperwork, the payments. How did all of that happen without me realizing? I took a sip of the wine he'd poured, a Sancerre I particularly enjoyed. You saw what you expected to see, Daniel. You believed I was financially dependent on you, so you never questioned where the property tax payments came from or who was paying the insurance. You signed documents I put in front of you because you assumed they were routine household matters beneath your attention. And the company? All these years, you've been running a multi-million-dollar business right under my nose? Not under your nose, I corrected. In plain sight. I told you I worked for West Coast Property Consulting. You simply never bothered to investigate what that actually meant. He shook his head, genuine bewilderment crossing his features. But when we socialized with my colleagues, with clients, you never mentioned any of this. Would you have wanted me to? I asked, genuinely curious. Would you have been comfortable with your associates knowing your wife was as professionally successful as you? Perhaps more so? His silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I continued. So I played the role you preferred, the supportive. Wife with her little consulting job, it was simpler for everyone. Not simpler, Daniel argued, his voice strained. Just fundamentally dishonest. The accusation might have stung if it hadn't been so hypocritical. Honesty hasn't exactly been the cornerstone of our marriage, Daniel. Or have you forgotten Stephanie, Rebecca, Megan, Laura? He had the grace to look away, focusing on his meal with sudden intensity. Will you sign the rental agreement? I asked, steering us back to the primary purpose of this conversation. Daniel sighed, pushing his plate away slightly. Do I have a choice? My lawyer says challenging the property ownership would be expensive and likely futile. Finding a comparable place on short notice would be difficult. And you know my client relationships depend partly on maintaining a certain image. Image has always been important to you, I observed neutrally. To us, he corrected. Our lifestyle, our social circle, it's been a partnership in that way at least. I considered this perspective. There was some truth to it. I had participated willingly in building our social facade, had enjoyed the benefits of our public image as a successful couple. But that wasn't the whole story. A partnership implies equal investment, equal respect. I said finally, You've provided neither for years. Daniel reached for his wine glass, his expression contemplative. And now you're making me pay for it, literally. I'm asking you to pay fair market value for a property you wish to occupy, I corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. And the guest restriction? Is that also fair market value? That's a landlord's prerogative, I replied. If the terms aren't acceptable, you're free to find alternative accommodation. He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the wife he thought he knew. You've changed. No, I disagreed quietly. I've simply stopped pretending. The remainder of dinner passed in strained conversation about practicalities, which spaces in the house would remain common areas, which would be exclusively mine, how we would handle shared expenses like utilities, the mundane details of dismantling a marriage while continuing to occupy the same physical space. I'll sign the agreement, Daniel finally said as he collected our empty plates. But I want one modification. I believe I mentioned the terms are non-negotiable. Hear me out, he persisted. 6 months instead of month to month. I'll pay the full amount up front as a show of good faith. It will give me time to find something suitable without rushing. I considered the request. 6 months of guaranteed rental income was appealing, and having a firm end date would provide clarity for both of us. I'll have Victoria draft the modified agreement, but the guest restriction remains. He nodded, accepting this condition with surprising grace. One more thing, the furniture. Much of it was purchased together. How do we determine what's yours and what's mine? Anything purchased after the house was transferred to the LLC belongs to me, I replied. The documentation is quite thorough, but I'm not unreasonable, Daniel. When you find a new place, we can discuss what items you'd like to take, within limits. And my home office? My personal files? You can continue to use the space until your lease ends. After that, you'll need to relocate everything. The reality of our new arrangement seemed to hit him anew with each detail. The man who had so confidently filed for divorce, certain he held all the power, was now negotiating for basic considerations in what he had always considered his home. You've thought of everything, he remarked, and I wasn't sure if the note in his voice was admiration or resentment, perhaps both. I've had years to prepare, I reminded him. While you were building a case for why you'd outgrown our marriage, I was building contingencies. He winced at hearing his own words repeated back to him. About that, I shouldn't have phrased it that way. It was cruel and unnecessarily hurtful. Yes, it was, I agreed, making no effort to ease his discomfort. But it was honest, at least. You did outgrow our marriage, Daniel. You outgrew the version of me you found convenient, the supportive wife who existed primarily to enhance your professional image. Unfortunately for you, that version was always a fiction. Daniel began loading the dishwasher, a domestic task he'd rarely performed during our marriage. Another small adjustment to our new reality. Gregory wants to discuss the rest of the settlement tomorrow, he said, changing the subject. Victoria mentioned meeting at Canlis? Noon, I confirmed. I thought a public venue might encourage civility. He grimaced slightly. People will talk. People always talk, Daniel, particularly about divorce. Would you prefer they discuss how you left your wife for your younger colleague or how you and your soon-to-be ex maintain a cordial relationship despite the circumstances? When you put it that way, he conceded, Canlis makes sense. After dinner, we retreated to separate parts of the house, Daniel to his study, me to my office. The strange domesticity of sharing a meal had given way to the awkward reality of two people occupying the same space while living increasingly separate lives. Later that evening, as I prepared for bed, I heard Daniel on the phone, his voice a low murmur from behind his closed door. Speaking with Laura, no doubt, explaining the latest developments. I wondered how he was framing the situation, as a temporary setback, a tactical retreat, or was he finally acknowledging the full extent of his miscalculation? Morning arrived, with a text from Victoria confirming our lunch reservation and the updated rental agreement. I forwarded the document to Daniel with a brief note. For your review before lunch, we can sign afterward if acceptable. His response was equally terse. Reviewed, acceptable. The formality of our communications felt appropriate, businesslike, detached, focused on practicalities rather than emotions. This was how landlords and tenants interacted after all. Professional and impersonal. I dressed carefully for the lunch meeting, selecting a pale blue suit that projected confidence without aggression. The pearls my mother had given me for my 30th birthday completed the look. Elegant, established, unquestionably in control. Daniel had already left for work by the time I came downstairs, a note on the kitchen counter informing me he would meet us at the restaurant. Another small adjustment to our new dynamic, no longer automatically coordinating our schedules, no longer arriving together as a united front. I spent the morning on conference calls with investors, deliberately immersing myself in work to avoid dwelling on the lunch ahead. By the time I arrived at Canlis, I felt centered and composed, my professional persona firmly in place. The maitre d' greeted me by name, escorting me to a table where Victoria was already waiting, her silver hair gleaming in the restaurant's soft lighting. "Daniel and Gregory are running a few minutes late," she informed me as I took my seat. "Apparently some client emergency came up." "How convenient," I remarked, though without real irritation. These small power plays were to be expected. "I reviewed the modified rental agreement," Victoria continued, her voice low despite the privacy, "of our table. The terms are solid. 6 months paid up front is actually better for us. It gives you guaranteed income without the hassle of monthly collections. And prevents Daniel from changing his mind halfway through," I added. Victoria nodded. "Exactly. Once he signs, he's committed for the full term." Our conversation paused as Daniel and Gregory approached the table, both men in impeccable suits projecting an air of hurried importance. "Apologies for the delay," Gregory offered as they took their seats. "Client situation couldn't be avoided." "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "Shall we order before we begin? I find these discussions go more smoothly with good food." The small talk during ordering was painfully polite. Comments about the menu, the weather, the restaurant's recent renovation. The careful neutrality of people determined to maintain appearances despite the tensions simmering beneath. Once our orders had been taken, Gregory opened his portfolio, all business now that the social niceties had been observed. "We've reviewed the financial disclosures provided by Mrs. Bennett," he began, "and while we still have some questions about the timing of certain asset transfers, my client is prepared to move forward with settlement discussions on the understanding that the marital home is indeed Mrs. Bennett's separate property." "A wise decision," Victoria replied. "And the rental agreement?" Daniel cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the revised terms. 6 months, paid in full up front with the guest restrictions, as specified. I'll sign after lunch." Gregory looked less than pleased with this capitulation, but offered no objections. With the housing issue resolved, we should discuss the division of financial assets. Mr. Bennett is prepared to withdraw his claim to Mrs. Bennett's business interests, provided she reciprocates regarding his investment portfolio. "That seems reasonable," I agreed, surprising both men with my quick acceptance. They had clearly expected a fight over Daniel's considerable investment assets. What they didn't yet realize was that I had no interest in those particular assets. I had my own investments, my own security. What I wanted now was a clean break with minimal ongoing entanglements. "However," Victoria added, "we will require full financial transparency regarding those investments before finalizing any agreement. Given the discrepancies in Mr. Bennett's initial disclosures, we need to verify that all assets are being properly accounted for." Gregory stiffened slightly. "My client has been fully transparent. Your client claimed our marital home was jointly owned when it wasn't," I interrupted gently. "You can understand our caution." Daniel had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I've instructed my financial advisor to prepare complete statements of all accounts. You'll have them by the end of the week." Our first courses arrived, temporarily, halting the negotiations. I noticed Daniel watching me as I took my first bite of salad, his expression unreadable. For years we had shared meals like this, discussing our days, making plans, presenting a picture of marital harmony to the world. Now we were carving up the remains of that marriage with the same polite efficiency. "There's the matter of the wedding china," Gregory said as he consulted his notes. "Mr. Bennett believes it should be considered joint property, as it was a gift to both parties." I almost laughed at the pettiness of the request. Daniel had never shown the slightest interest in the Royal Copenhagen set my grandmother had given us. This was clearly a test, seeing what I would concede, establishing a pattern for larger negotiations. "He's welcome to it," I replied smoothly. "I have no particular attachment to those pieces." Daniel looked momentarily taken aback by my easy acquiescence. Another miscalculation on his part, assuming I would fight over sentimental items when my focus was on the substantial assets. "And the art collection?" Gregory continued. "Many pieces were acquired during the marriage. With funds from my separate property," Victoria interjected, consulting her own notes. "We have documentation tracing each major purchase back to Mrs. Bennett's business accounts." The negotiations continued through the main course, a carefully choreographed dance of requests and responses, each side probing for weaknesses while maintaining a veneer of reasonableness. By dessert, we had outlined the broad strokes of a settlement agreement that, while not entirely equitable given what I now knew about Daniel's financial maneuvering, would allow for a clean and relatively swift dissolution of our marriage. "One final matter," Gregory said as coffee was served. "The issue of Mrs. Bennett's surname. My client would prefer she revert to her maiden name after the divorce is finalized." The request was both unexpected and deeply revealing. Daniel wanted to erase all visible connections between us, to remove any reminder that the woman who had outmaneuvered him had once been his wife. "That won't be necessary," I replied calmly. "Bennett is my professional name. I have no intention of changing it." "But surely," Gregory began, before Daniel raised a hand to silence him. "It's fine," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Claire should keep whatever name works best for her business interests." The concession surprised me. Perhaps Daniel was finally beginning to recognize the futility of trying to control aspects of my life that were now firmly beyond his reach. As lunch concluded, Victoria produced the rental agreement for signing. Daniel reviewed it one final time, his expression unreadable as he initialed each page before adding his signature to the final one. "I'll have the first payment transferred to the account specified by end of day," he said, handing the document. Back to Victoria. "Congratulations, Claire. You're officially my landlord." There was a hint of wry humor in his tone, the first acknowledgement that he recognized the irony of our situation. The man who had dismissed my career as insignificant was now legally obligated to pay me a substantial sum for the privilege of living in my house. "I'll have my assistant email you the property rules and maintenance guidelines," I replied, matching his tone. "I'm sure you'll find them quite reasonable." As we left the restaurant, I noticed several familiar faces at nearby tables, members of our social circle who would undoubtedly spread word of our lunch meeting throughout Seattle's upper echelons by dinner. Daniel had noticed them too, judging by the careful way he held the door for me, the polite kiss on the cheek as we parted in the parking lot. Always conscious of appearances, even now. "I'll see you at home," he said, then caught himself. "At the house, I mean." "Yes," I agreed, the distinction not lost on me. "See you there." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Daniel in my rearview mirror, standing beside his Tesla, watching me leave. His expression was contemplative, perhaps even a little lost, a man suddenly unsure of his footing in a world that had shifted beneath him. Phase 3. Complete, I thought as I merged onto the highway. From husband to tenant. From partner to business arrangement. The transformation was well underway, and with each signed document, each negotiated term, the reality of our new relationship solidified. What remained to be seen was how well Daniel would adapt to this reality, and what further adjustments awaited us both as the divorce proceedings continued toward their inevitable conclusion. 2 weeks into our new arrangement, I sat at my desk reviewing the final settlement documents Victoria had sent over. The terms were more favorable than I had initially expected, a testament to how thoroughly Daniel had been blindsided by my financial disclosures. His desire for a quick, quiet resolution had overridden any impulse to fight for assets he might have claimed through prolonged litigation. A notification popped up on my laptop, a rent payment confirmation from Daniel's account. exactly on time, as stipulated in our agreement. I forwarded the notice to my accountant with a brief note about recording it properly for tax purposes. Living with my soon-to-be ex-husband as his landlord had created a strange dynamic in the house. We operated like carefully choreographed dancers, each aware of the other's movements, but studiously maintaining our separate orbits. Daniel had taken to texting before using common areas, planning to use kitchen at 7 or will be in living, room until 9, as if requesting permission to exist in spaces that had once been unquestionably his. For my part, I had reclaimed rooms that had previously been his domain. His home gym was now my yoga studio. His media room had been transformed into an expansion of my office. Small changes that nevertheless reinforced our new power dynamic with every passing day. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie, the friend I'd mentioned to Daniel during our earliest confrontation. "Drinks tonight? Need updates on landlord life?" I smiled at the nickname she'd coined after hearing about my arrangement with Daniel. "Rooftop at the Thompson, 7 p.m. Bring reinforcements. Lots to discuss." The afternoon passed in a blur of work calls and property management tasks. At 5:30, I received a text from Daniel. "Reminder, investment group meeting at house tonight, 8 to 10 p.m. 6 colleagues. We'll keep to dining room and den." This was another adjustment in our new reality. Daniel had continued hosting his monthly investment meetings at the house, now with formal notice as required in our rental agreement. I suspected he hadn't told his colleagues about our changed circumstances, maintaining the illusion that he still owned the impressive property they gathered in. "Acknowledged," I texted back. "I'll be out until 11. I changed into a sleek black dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and evening appropriate, adding gold statement earrings that caught the light with every movement. As I applied a final touch of lipstick, I heard Daniel's key in the front door, earlier than usual for a meeting night. We met in the hallway, his expression flickering briefly with appreciation before settling into careful neutrality. "You look nice," he offered, the compliment sounding almost involuntary. "Thank you. Meeting friends at the Thompson." His eyebrows rose slightly. "The new rooftop bar. I hear it's impossible to get reservations." "I know the owner," I replied simply, enjoying the subtle reminder of my professional connections. Connections Daniel had never bothered to explore or understand during our marriage. He nodded, adjusting his tie with the nervous gesture I recognized from client meetings. "About tonight, we'll be discussing the Westlake development. Nothing too rowdy." "I'm not concerned about rowdiness, Daniel. Just keep to the terms of our agreement." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Laura asked about coming tonight." I raised an eyebrow. "The guest restriction is quite clear." "For overnight guests," he clarified quickly. "She wouldn't be staying, just attending the meeting as a potential investor." The request was so transparent it was almost amusing. Laura worked in marketing at Daniel's firm. She had no background in investment property and limited personal assets to invest. This was clearly an attempt to integrate her into Daniel's social circle, to establish her presence in what had once been our shared home. "The agreement specifies that all guests must leave by 11 p.m., I reminded him. "As long as that condition is met, you can invite whoever you wish to your business meetings." Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something like disappointment. Had he been hoping for an objection? An emotional response he could interpret as jealousy? "She won't stay past 10, he assured me. "We both have early meetings. Tomorrow." "Fine." I picked up my clutch from the entry table. "Enjoy your evening." "Claire," he called as I reached the door. When I turned, his expression was uncharacteristically hesitant. "Is this working for you? This arrangement?" The question caught me off guard with its earnestness. "It's serving its purpose," I replied after a moment. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, the gesture looking awkward on his usually composed frame. "It's strange, isn't it? Living together while legally separating. sharing space while dividing assets. Many things about divorce are strange, Daniel. This is just our particular version, I suppose. He looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it. Have a good evening. The Thompsons' rooftop. Bar offered panoramic views of Seattle's skyline, the Space Needle illuminated against the darkening sky. Maggie was already at our reserved table, along with our mutual friend Elise. Both women rose to embrace me as I approached. She arrives, Maggie declared, stepping back to assess me, looking absolutely nothing like a woman in the midst of divorce proceedings. That's the point, I replied, taking my seat and accepting the champagne Elise had already ordered. Never. Let them see you falter. So, Elise began, leaning forward eagerly, how is life as Daniel Bennett's landlord? As satisfying as you'd hoped? I considered the question while taking a sip of my champagne. It's educational, for both of us. Details, Maggie demanded. We want all the delicious details. I recounted the developments of the past 2 weeks, the careful dance of shared spaces, the formality of our interactions, the text message permissions and notifications. It's like watching the most powerful man you know slowly realize he's not powerful at all, I concluded. At least not in the ways he always assumed. And tonight, Elise asked, you mentioned he's hosting some work thing? His monthly investment group, with a special guest, Laura. Both women's eyebrows shot up in perfect synchronization. He's bringing her to your house? Maggie demanded, outrage coloring her tone. That takes some nerve. My house, my terms, I reminded her. And technically, she's attending as a potential investor. Please, Elise scoffed. That woman wouldn't know a good investment if it came with flashing neon signs. This is about claiming territory. Territory that isn't his to claim, I pointed out, which makes it rather pathetic when you think about it. Have you met her? Maggie asked, signaling the waiter for another round. Properly, I mean. No, and I don't intend to. Our paths may cross eventually, but I see no reason to facilitate an introduction. The conversation shifted to other topics. Elise's recent promotion, Maggie's new relationship, the ongoing renovations at my commercial property in Vancouver. Normal life continuing alongside the dismantling of my marriage. 3 hours and several drinks later, I decided it was time to head home. The investment meeting would be wrapping up, and I was curious to see how Daniel and his colleagues interacted now that he was essentially hosting them in my property. You should arrive early, Maggie suggested with a mischievous gleam in her eye. Catch them all in mid-conversation. That would be petty, I replied, gathering my things. Yes, Elise agreed. Wonderfully, justifiably petty. I considered the suggestion. There was something appealing about making my presence felt, about reminding Daniel, even subtly, of our changed circumstances. Maybe just 15 minutes early, I conceded with a small smile. I arrived home at 9:45, the sound of male voices and occasional laughter emanating from the dining room. Daniel's Tesla was parked in the driveway alongside several other expensive vehicles, including a red Porsche I recognized as belonging to Michael Chen, his closest colleague. I entered quietly, setting my keys on the entry table with deliberate softness. From the dining room came Daniel's voice, confident and assured, as he outlined projected returns on a property development. The initial investment is substantial, but the tax advantages alone make it worthwhile. Claire and I have personally invested in similar ventures with excellent results. The casual inclusion of my name, the implication of our continued financial partnership, stopped me in my tracks. Even now, Daniel was leveraging our marriage, or the appearance of it, for professional advantage. I moved toward the dining room with purposeful steps, heels clicking against the hardwood floors to announce my presence. The conversation immediately hushed as I appeared in the doorway. 6 men in business casual attire sat around my dining table, laptops and documents spread before them. Daniel stood at the head of the table, a position of authority he'd automatically assumed. And beside him, looking distinctly uncomfortable, sat Laura. Younger than I'd expected, her highlighted blonde hair framing a pretty face currently frozen in an expression of alarm. "Good evening, gentlemen," I greeted them with a professional smile. "I hope you're enjoying your meeting." Daniel recovered first, his smile only slightly strained. "Claire, you're back early. We were just wrapping up our discussion of the Westlake project." "Don't let me interrupt," I replied, my gaze sweeping the table before landing deliberately on Laura. "I don't believe we've formally met. I'm Claire Bennett." Her eyes widened slightly at the direct address. "Laura Donovan," she managed, her voice higher than normal. "It's nice to meet you." The awkwardness in the room was palpable, the men shifting uncomfortably as they processed this unexpected confrontation. Michael, who had known us longest, looked particularly mortified. "Claire has been incredibly supportive of our investment ventures," Daniel said smoothly, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Her insights on property valuation have been invaluable." "How kind of you to say," I replied with equal smoothness. "Though I should clarify for everyone's benefit, the Westlake development is actually one of my company's projects. West Coast Property Consulting is managing the entire portfolio." Confusion flickered across several faces. Daniel had clearly been presenting the project as his own recommendation, perhaps even taking credit for securing early investment opportunities. "Your company?" Michael asked, looking between Daniel and me with growing bewilderment. "Yes," I confirmed. "I founded West Coast Property Consulting 8 years ago. We manage over 30 properties across the Pacific Northwest." The silence that followed was deafening. Laura stared at her hands, suddenly fascinated by her manicure. Daniel's colleagues exchanged glances laden with unspoken questions. "Well," I continued brightly, "don't let me disrupt your meeting. I'll be in my office if anyone needs anything." As I turned to leave, I added casually, "Just a reminder, Daniel, all guests need to be out by 11, as per our agreement." The deliberate emphasis on our agreement left no doubt about the nature of that relationship. I didn't wait for his response, continuing upstairs with unhurried confidence. In my office, I could hear the meeting below breaking up earlier than planned, murmured conversations and the scraping of chairs against hardwood. Within 20 minutes, the front door opened and closed multiple times as Daniel's colleagues made their hasty departures. I immersed myself in work, reviewing property valuations and responding to emails until a soft knock at my office door interrupted my focus. I expected Daniel come to complain about my untimely entrance or demand an explanation for my public correction. Instead, I found Laura standing uncertainly in the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Will I speak with you for a moment?" she asked, her voice steadier than it had been downstairs. Surprise momentarily silenced me. This was unprecedented, the mistress seeking out the wife for a private conversation. Curiosity overrode my initial impulse to refuse. "Come in," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Daniel knows you're here?" "He's cleaning up downstairs," she said, taking the seat with visible nervousness. "He doesn't know I came up to talk to you." I waited, allowing the silence to stretch until she felt compelled to fill it. "I wanted to apologize," she finally said, the words rushing out as if she'd rehearsed them. "Not for the relationship with Daniel, that's complicated, but for being here, in your home. It was inappropriate and insensitive." The apology was unexpected enough to merit honest response. "Yes, it was. Though technically you're a guest of my tenant, not an intruder in my home. The distinction matters." Confusion crossed her features. "Tenant? I don't understand." So Daniel hadn't told her. Interesting. "Daniel hasn't explained our current arrangement?" He said you were living together during the divorce proceedings to maintain appearances while you sorted out financial details. She frowned slightly. He said the house would be sold once everything was finalized. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. Even now, Daniel was constructing narratives that preserved his dignity and authority. That's not entirely accurate, I clarified. I own this house outright. Daniel is renting from me for the next 6 months while he finds alternative accommodations. Her eyes widened with genuine shock. You own, but he always talks about this place as if it's his? Yes, that's been a persistent misconception throughout our marriage. I studied her reaction, noting the rapid recalculation happening behind her eyes. Just as he apparently neglected to mention that I own the company he's been using to impress his investment group. Laura's composure visibly faltered. I thought you worked in consulting, something part-time. That's what Daniel told you? She nodded, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Did he happen to mention the other properties? The commercial buildings in Vancouver? The apartment complex in Portland? Each question seemed to hit her like a physical blow, her expression shifting, from confusion to dawning comprehension. He said, she began, then stopped, reconsidering her words. He presented himself as the financial success in your marriage. He said you struggled to maintain consistent employment. The lie was so audacious it almost impressed me. And you believed that without question? She had the grace to look embarrassed. I had no reason not to. He's respected at the firm. People listen when he speaks. Yes, I agreed. Daniel has always been very good at creating and maintaining a certain image, one that frequently diverges from reality. Laura was silent for a long moment, absorbing this information. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, less certain. Why are you telling me this? I considered the question carefully. Why indeed? It wasn't about jealousy or revenge. Laura was a symptom of our failed marriage, not its cause. Because you should understand exactly who you're involved with, I replied finally. Daniel values appearances above all else. He constructs narratives that enhance his image regardless of their accuracy. That won't change just because his audience does. She flinched slightly at the assessment but didn't dispute it. You must hate me. I don't know you well enough to hate you, I replied honestly. And while I don't particularly appreciate finding you in my dining room, my issues are with Daniel, not with you. A knock at the door interrupted our unlikely conversation. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to alarm as he registered Laura's presence. In my office. There you are, he said, his forced casualness fooling no one. We should get going. It's getting late. Laura rose, her posture noticeably stiffer than when she'd entered. Yes, we should. She turned to me, our eyes meeting in a moment of unexpected female solidarity. Thank you for your candor, Claire. It was illuminating. Daniel's gaze darted between us, clearly trying to gauge what had transpired in his absence. Everything okay here? Perfectly fine, I assured him. Laura and I were just getting properly acquainted. His discomfort was palpable as he ushered Laura toward the door. Before they left, he turned back, his expression carefully controlled. About what you said downstairs, regarding Westlake. That was unnecessary. Was it? You were presenting my project as your own investment opportunity. That seems more unnecessary to me. I was simply leveraging connections you no longer have, I finished for him. It won't happen again, Daniel. Not with Westlake, not with any of my properties. He stared at me for a long moment, a muscle working in his jaw. This isn't over. Claire? No, I agreed. We still have 5 months and 16 days left on your lease, but some things, like your ability to use my professional accomplishments for your personal gain, are very much over. After they departed, I returned to my desk, surprised to find my hands trembling slightly. The confrontation had been more affecting than I'd anticipated, not because of Daniel's reaction, but because of Laura's. The dawning realization in her eyes as she processed the true nature of the man she'd become involved with had been almost painful to witness. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. "How was the grand entrance? Suitably dramatic?" "More than I expected," I replied. "Just had a private chat with Laura." Her response was immediate. "What? Call me now." But I didn't call. Instead, I moved to the window overlooking the city, watching as Daniel's Tesla pulled away from the house, Laura a silent silhouette in the passenger seat. I wondered what they were discussing, what explanations or justifications Daniel was offering for the discrepancies in his carefully constructed narrative. More importantly, I wondered if she was believing them. A week later, Victoria called with news. Daniel's lawyer reached out this morning. They want to accelerate the divorce proceedings. Interesting timing, I remarked, thinking of the investment group meeting and its aftermath. Any particular reason given? Officially, they cited scheduling concerns. Daniel apparently has extensive travel planned for the coming months. Unofficially, I suspect your recent interactions have motivated him to conclude matters more swiftly. Can we accommodate the request without compromising our position? Easily, Victoria assured me. The settlement terms are already favorable. Accelerating the timeline only benefits you at this point. After ending the call, I found Daniel in the kitchen, preparing coffee with the expensive machine he'd insisted on purchasing last year. He glanced up as I entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Victoria called," I informed him, leaning against the counter. "You want to fast-track the divorce?" He nodded, focusing intently on measuring coffee grounds. "It seems sensible given that we've agreed on most terms. No reason to drag things out." "I agree." Victoria is preparing the expedited paperwork. Relief flashed briefly across his features. "Good. That's good." Laura suggested the acceleration. "Didn't she?" I asked, watching his hands falter in their precise movements. "Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."